Good morning. As Jenny said, my name is David Roof. I'm the Executive Director of the Great Schools Partnership. And I'm going to fly through a bunch of things here pretty quickly. I'm happy to talk more about this afterwards in the Q&A, as Jenny has talked about, and I'll be sticking around here a little bit. And a lot of this information is on our website, so by all means, feel free to go there. We're going to go quickly on the background here. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about a driver's license. I'm suspecting most of you have a driver's license. Talk a little bit about that process there. Design levers to improve student learning, what we're seeing both in New England and around the country. And then finally just end with this idea of shifting some concepts as we move forward this. You'll notice throughout all this, what I really want to emphasize here is it's a design question. The more and more we look at what's going on in schools, there's a design issue that seems to lie below the surface, so we haven't actually unpacked enough at this point. So a little bit of background on the Great Schools Partnership. Again, on our website, there's all kinds of information there. We are a nonprofit. I drove down this morning from Portland, Maine. I have to actually laugh sometimes now. I say Portland and people say West Coast time, and we say no, it's Portland, Maine. It's right here. We are working across New England. We're actually working across the country at this point, seeing all this work take place in many, many different contexts. We work with schools, districts, state agencies, and we do coaching and developing tools and connecting with them in ways to help them move that work forward. We believe that we should have an equitable, personalized, rigorous learning for all students that prepares them for college careers and citizenship. A key piece there around citizenship is it's not just enough to have smart kids. We want good, smart kids. And so when we think of the people we want living next door to us, we want them to be good people, not just smart people that are there. We believe that you must attend simultaneously to policy, practice, and community engagement. We looked a lot at the whole notion of systemic change and really a movement of changing the educational system. It's not about a couple of schools, it's about the system. And unless we change all three of those, attend to all those pieces, we have to change the policy that encourages and enables schools to do the work. We have to change the practice in our schools and districts. And we have to change the public's concept of what a good school is so that they start to demand the learning that we know is important. We believe it's context-based. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about here today, people come up often and say, what's the first step? What's the second step? What's the third step? And I can't tell you, because it will depend on where you're at. And to be explicit, this means that there may be things that I say today that you would like to argue with, you would like to debate, and I would say, great. Because the things that work in one place don't necessarily always work in another, but they can teach us something about how we can do our work better. So let's talk about driver's licenses for a moment, okay? I was going to ask, but I won't embarrass anybody if anybody doesn't have a driver's license. I think most people do. I'm a little embarrassed. My daughter is now in college, doesn't have her driver's license yet. We're kind of cranking on her a little bit about that at this point. So a story in design history around automobiles. As you know, automobiles, when they came in, they were actually a new technology that was placed on old technology, on old roads, and people started running around with these cars, figuring it out. I have a great story I'm happy to share at some point about my great-great-grandfather when he went and bought a car and figured out, they gave him the lesson there at the auto dealers, he got it. But we had this happen. Driving largely trial and error. Okay, let's try this out, let's see what happens. A lot of accidents, a lot of strange things happening, until somebody said, maybe we need some rules around this. We've got a better understanding of what's going to go on here so we don't continue to have those accidents. And somebody said, maybe we need some way for people to show they're actually ready to drive so that people don't just, I put my money down, I got my car, and away I go. Okay, which we would all argue today would be incredibly dangerous, but when it first came out was not so much seen as an idea. And so we said, let's have a test. Okay, let's have both a written test and let's have a road test. Okay, we all know about kids who've gone through. Most of them fly through the written tests. Many of them struggle on the road test. But we do both of those things because we want to know about their capacity to understand what's going on and their ability to actually do it. Okay, both of those pieces are there. So let's unpack those assessments for just a second. So the written test, it's criterion referenced. Okay? That means we have standards that we expect kids to know, and we score that test on knowing that. We don't say, because you are the best today, you pass. Because you are the worst today, you don't pass. We say, here's the expectation. If you meet that standard, you pass. It provides multiple opportunities. Okay? Many students don't pass on that. They get the chance to do it again. And here's the key thing. It's not averaged. Okay? When you go to take the driver's test for a second time, the fact that you failed the first time is actually only relevant because you've got to spend more time on it. We don't take the first score and average it with the second score and say, you made it. Okay? All we are concerned about is the second score. Now, if you unpack the road test, again, it's criterion reference. And here's the key thing. It's criterion reference on different evidence. So there are standards that kids are supposed to demonstrate to get that license, but because it is live, okay, let's face facts, sometimes that test is harder than it is at other times. Sometimes the evidence that is gathered is different than it is at other times. So we pass judgment on different sets of evidence. It's a performance assessment. Okay? So that brings with it all the great things about performance assessments and all the problems of performance assessments. We have multiple opportunities. Don't do it this time, get to sign up and do it again. Okay? If you fail at 5 times and you pass the 6th time, your license is as good as the kid who passed it the first time. Okay? And again, it isn't averaged. I don't look at those first 5 failures and then say, well, it's good you got a 90 this time because when I average those out, it's a 60, and our cut score is a 60, you're okay. Okay? No, it's what you actually get there. So then we looked and said, let's create a better support system so we can get more kids through and get more licenses out there to be safer for all of us, okay? So we started driver's education courses. The classes there, remember, for support, not demonstration. It's not required after age 20. I think that's true in Massachusetts. I know it's true in most states that you don't actually have to take the course. You do before that age. And it's offered through multiple venues. So it's not like one group can do it. There are multiple venues to get through that. So there are some design beliefs that are built into this. So there's common learning standards, is what we expect. There's a demonstration of knowledge and skills. Okay, we want you to show both of those things. Past performance doesn't indicate current capacity. It's evidence-based. Okay, again, that piece about the road test, it's about evidence. They don't say you go through all these different things, we got to make it exactly the same. There's human scoring by multiple people. Okay, the road test is scored by humans, and it's scored by multiple people, so it's not one person who scores that. There are multiple learning pathways to get there. It's age-related but not defined. And it's a variable time to demonstrate. You get to choose when you're ready to go and demonstrate that. Now, if we took that and said, let's design that like we design schools. So first off, would be different standards for different students. Okay, we look and say, we think could be a really good driver, so we're going to have a different set of standards for you. We don't think you're going to be such a good driver. We have a lower set of standards for you. That would be a nightmare. Okay? The initial failures are averaged with later successes. So that kid who really bombed it the first time, boy, you're going to have to take this 4 or 5 more times in order to get this score up there. There would be no road test. Why would we have a performance assessment on that? Why would we have a demonstration? There would be no road test. There would be a single pathway. It would be organized by age cohorts. So it didn't matter that you were starting driving at 18 or you're starting driving at 16. If you're 16, you're in this cohort. If you're 18, you're in a different cohort. There would be centralized scoring. Okay? We would have all the scoring done in one spot. And there would be a predetermined testing time. So we would walk through and we would say, this is the day. Not when you want to send it in, not when you think you're ready. This is the day. Okay? So both schools and driver's tests are learning and demonstrating experiences. Why are they so very different? So let's unpack this a little bit about the historical design of our schools. Okay? So historically, school design, we believed there was a measurement of time would equal learning. So if you had this amount of time that you spent learning, we would argue that that equated to learning. Okay? You spend this amount of time, this amount of learning will happen. We believe that if we gave everybody equal time, we'd have equity. You all get the same amount of, same chance. It's a school year. You all get the same thing. That's got to be equity. Grade averaging provides reliable data. We looked at that and said, if we average up all these grades, the score that we come to the end is actually a reliable figure on your capacity. We would look at knowledge should be isolated from content. We look at learners can integrate knowledge without assistance. So we look and say, because you learn this in English, and you learn this in science, and you learn this in social studies, the concept that draws those together, you'll be able to figure that out. Okay? We don't have to draw those connections. We just have to worry about English, science, and social studies. Age determines capacity to learn, and all capacities are the same by age. Thank God all 8-year-olds are in the same spot. Okay? These are design principles that our schools have been designed on. Okay? This is the piece that's behind them. One pathway can work for everyone. Reliability of judgment is more important than trustworthiness of data. Here's let me unpack that one for a second. We look and say an easily scored assessment where we can determine without a doubt that you and I would come up to the same judgment of the value of the learning that's there is more important than if that learning is actually valuable. And so we digress to small chunks of things that we measure because we can measure them reliably as opposed to if they are important. Learning happens in predetermined chunks of time. Schools should serve as childcare. And we have no school in the summer. All of these are design principles that were put in place around our schools to set the way we want them to be, what we want them to look like. And if you look at these logically, the system we have actually fits these things. It makes perfectly logical sense. It's there. Recently, we've added a few more things on this. Okay? The pace of student learning creates student agency over learning. So how fast kids go through their learning, we are from a design principle saying that means that they'll own their learning. Okay? The second one that's in there, student individuality outweighs the importance of other students or teachers. So the fact that letting kids progress as they want to progress, working individually to do that is more important than kids engaging with kids engaging with teachers, kids engaging with a broader audience on that. These are design principles that are in place right now. More technology is better. Doesn't matter what it is, more is better. Better content knowledge equals better teaching. If teachers know more, they will be better teachers. Okay? It doesn't look at necessarily teachers' skill at instruction, but if teachers know more, they will be better. More of the same will create deeper learning. So let me talk about that for a second. Then I'll move on to what I think the design principles should be. A lot of the change that's happening right now in America is operating on the assumption that the system's pretty good. Okay? There's not a real problem with the system. The problem is we need to add the right things. And so if we go through that and add something to that that's good, okay, and add another thing that's good, and add another thing that's good, like we add, an extended day, or we add an extra block for learning, or we do learning in the summer, all doing the same thing on the system we have, and we keep adding up these little good things come through here. What we will end up with at the end of all this is a system that's great. Okay? It's good. Keep adding all these little things around this, keep adding, and it will be great. And I'll tell you, I don't think that's true. I think the problem we have is at the core of the design of the system, we have a problem. Okay? A thing to keep in the back of your mind as we go forward on this. If the design is the problem, we've got to think about what we're actually trying to attend to move this work forward. And there's good and bad news in that, and we'll talk about that at the end of this. So, what are we trying to get at? So we're biased. I'll be upfront about that. We put out this document called Global Best Practices. You can download it from our website. This comes from looking at successful practices around the world. Okay? So global, it is internationally, but internationally meaning across the world. And so we looked at places that had success at scale and found out what are the things that they're doing and what do we keep seeing coming up again and again and again. That's what this is. Okay? You can use it. It's kind of a school. It's a rubric to figure out where you're at and where you want to go. So here are 5 design levers that I think will help achieve alignment with global best practices. And these are ways to think about the design of our systems that are different than the design factors we have today. Number 1, emphasize learning over time. Okay? It's very clear that a key design factor that we have in our system right now is time. Controlling that time, how much time kids spend on something, when the day starts, when the day ends, how long the year is. But let's emphasize learning over time. So when we base learning on time, some odd things happen. Okay? You see all these kids here? Okay? These kids aren't physically growing at the same rate. Why would we think they'd learn at the same rate? It doesn't make sense to me that we're very willing to say the kids have growth spurts at different times, but we're not willing to say they have different mental growth spurts at different times. That only makes sense to me that they would do that. Can we assume equity by giving every student the same time? Okay, we talked about that as a design principle in our early system. It is flawed. Okay? Anybody who's ever done anything with 2 or more kids, 2 or more kids, knows that they don't learn at the same rate. Okay? And more importantly, it's not that one kid is always slower than the other kid. It's that their rates fluctuate as you go through. Practice makes perfect. Again, on this whole time question here. Okay? Take a look at this for a second. So student 1, first tried something, failed, then got a D, then got a C, then got a B, then got an A, and guess what the final grade is? It's a C. Student 2, A, B, C, D, F, is going downhill, final grade is C. Student 3, all C's, got a C. Okay. Student 4, all A's to get an A. Okay, this is like in some ways going back to the driver's test, that I would look at this and say, student 1, who's demonstrating the capacity, I'm good with student 1. Okay? I'm much better with student 1 than I am with student 3, who kind of just got by most of the time. Okay, here are some things we need to rethink if we're going to move on time. 1, credits based on time in class. Okay? Because you spend 180 days here, you get a credit. It doesn't pass a straight face test. That would be like saying, if you go to the driver's test and you were there every day, for the driver's course, and you come every day, we're going to give you a driver's license. Nobody would do that. Nobody would give a driver's license because you sat there every day, and yet we give credit because kids sit there every day. School day and school year. Okay? You heard me say, we got to think about learning over time, but we do have to think about how we use time. Age cohorts. Okay? Just because everybody's 8 doesn't mean the same thing. And averaging quarter grades or end of year grades. This is one of those big pieces to take a look at. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that we take the first quarter grades and we average those with the last quarter grades. I don't really care how well a kid writes in September, except for purposes of helping that kid learn. What I really care about is how well that kid writes in June. That's what I really want to know. And averaging those things together doesn't make sense. The second piece, value equity over competition. Okay, again, a design principle, value equity over competition. You've got this. I passed this out. Quickly go through this. I could spend all day on this piece here, but it's essentially we think you've got to move towards a proficiency or a mastery or a competency-based system. Okay, so instead of saying the kids who are doing the best get an A, the kids who are doing the worst get an F, we say what is it we want kids to know and be able to do, and how do we want to measure that? And so this system you see up there essentially says there are sets of standards that we call graduation standards. They're big items, okay? They're about being able to write well, okay? You have a handful of those. You break those down into performance indicators. You break those down into learning targets, which are kind of what happens on a daily basis. You assess the performance indicators and aggregate up to see if kids have demonstrated those graduation competencies or graduation standards that are there. Assessment-wise, for the top piece, which shows cross-curricular pieces, things like problem-solving, perseverance, tenacity, those things, you've got to have a body of evidence to do that, usually some type of a portfolio for that. And then finally, and we'll talk a little bit about this coming up here, notice that piece on the left, the graduation requirements. That's what we call the level of student accountability. Yes, yes, no, no. So not accountable for all those small things, but accountable for the big things that are there. Remember proficiency or competency or mastery. If people say to me, can we just implement that? Let's just do that. And I would argue it's not a standalone intervention, but it's a suite of practices you've got to take a look at. And so it's It's not like implementing the new third grade reading program. It's like fundamentally rethinking what it means to do for learning in your school. What do we need to rethink? Ranking class. Okay? I don't get ranking class. It doesn't pass the straight-face test. If you believe in ranking class, I would challenge you to go take a look at the GPA of your kids who graduated from your high school, okay, and look at number 10 versus number 11 over the last 10 years. Okay? First off, in 1 year, you're going to find there are hundredths of a decimal point to separate them. If you think your assessment system is accurate to within hundredths of a decimal point, I want to see it, because I don't think it is. I mean, that's no fault of yours. I just don't think we can be that accurate on that. And yet, we are in ranking class. Doesn't make sense. In weighted ranking class, even worse. Tracking. Okay. I do think it's, one thing people say, what about early college courses? Yes, kids can take early college courses. They're ready for that. But when we start tracking kids, in some cases at 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, we are predetermining the outcome for them. That is basically unfair. If we say these are things we want kids to know and be able to do, those are the things kids need to know and be able to do. Honors recognition that is earned when you sign up for the class. Think about that. You sign up for an honors class in March, and what goes on your transcript is honors. That doesn't make any sense. You should earn honors recognition. Activities at graduation, the various activities that happen there. Think about how we recognize a small handful of kids as opposed to recognizing all kids. And there are great examples across the country of schools that recognize all kids at graduation beyond their name and they walk across and get a handshake. They actually stand up, they say something, they're a part of what's going on there. Okay, value evidence rather than assessments. So this counts here. These kids kind of sitting there bored in a classroom. This doesn't. We don't accept this. This counts. All these kids sitting in a class, listening to somebody talk at them. Sorry, much like you're doing right now. Okay. This doesn't. A kid actually engaging in reading that's there. Okay. We need to think of a way that we actually look at the evidence of learning, not the assessment task loophole that you may have jumped through. Okay? Now, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying that we should not have assessments. I'm saying we should have assessments. We should set up ways for kids to demonstrate learning, but we should be open to kids demonstrating learning in a variety of ways. You also have this in your packet there. This piece here talks about assessment pathways. Real quickly on this, there are 3 things that always happen in learning. Okay? There's the learning experience. What do kids do to get this knowledge or these skills? There's the demonstration task. How do they actually demonstrate what they know? And then there is a scoring that takes place that judges the quality of that. Is it good enough in terms of the standards for that? That happens every time. Okay? Now the wonderful thing here is you can actually mix and match the learning tasks and the demonstration tasks. So as you see here in this top piece here, it's a common learning experience for everybody to do the exact same thing. They demonstrate in the same way, and we score it using common scoring criteria. At the end, what we get out of that are comparable results. Now, the reason we want to have comparable results are not to say you're good because you're better than this other kid, you're bad because you're worse than this other kid, but rather to say, how are our boys doing versus our girls? How are our ELL students doing versus our non-ELL students? How are our special ed students doing versus our non-special ed students? How are our students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch doing versus our non-eligible ones? We need some comparisons data to keep ourselves honest, not to say you're good or you're bad. Okay? So then you can vary up the learning experiences. You can have different learning experiences, and you can have different demonstration tasks to get there, as long as you have this final row here of common scoring criteria. Okay? If you have that, you can actually place judgment. Ironically, standardized testing is pathway 3, right down here. Pathway 3, in that they have different learning tasks, but they have the same demonstration task. Finally, at the bottom there, you can vary all of those. It's not a bad thing to do instructionally. It's just not viable in terms of an accountability or assessment system. What do we need to rethink here? Single learning pathways, assessment hoops, Okay, just as an aside, we work with a school that they had about 2/3 of the kids spoke Spanish in the home. Those kids weren't getting into colleges, and they were wondering why, and so they brought in some admissions officers to ask about that. And the admissions officer said, well, there's no Spanish on their transcript. These are kids who speak Spanish in the home. Okay? So kids who took Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 could probably limp along in Spanish, were getting credit. Kids who spoke Spanish fluently were not getting credit because they didn't jump through the right assessment hoops. Homework, it's a question about homework we have to look at here. Is homework a grade or is homework an assist? Combining academic grades and habits of work. Okay? So we look and say, you worked really hard, so I'm going to give you a boost on your grade. Okay? Or you were a real pain in the class, I'm going to give you a decrease in your grade. Using assessments to control student behavior. Quick poll here. How many people have done a pop quiz when you were a teacher? I'm raising my hand. Okay? Wow, I'm surprised. The pop quiz, the only reason I gave a pop quiz is because I was ticked off they weren't doing their reading. Okay? A pop quiz is actually it's a control mechanism, not an assessment mechanism. We have to look at athletic eligibility. What does it mean to be eligible for any athletic or co-curricular or any of those pieces? 4, operate accountability at higher levels of rigor. Are we concerned about kids knowing where to put a comma, or are we concerned about having kids write well? I would argue we are concerned about having kids write well. Had a problem the other day. Okay, I got a call. I love this little red phone here, don't you? You know how hard it is to find a picture of a real phone these days? It's almost impossible. And a red one, I was kind of psyched. Anyway, I got a call from a superintendent who said, David, I'm a little upset with you. I was like, I don't like to get a call. People say they start by saying, I'm upset with you. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, I went into one of my high schools the other day, and I started talking to kids. And they could tell me what they were doing. You promised me that kids could actually tell me what they were doing if we moved to a proficiency-based system. And they could tell me what they were doing. But they were talking about little things. Okay? They were talking about dates in history, not about the big ideas of history. They were talking about commas and not writing. They were talking about how to figure out how to compute, not how to use math on this. The big ideas were gone. And I said, John, what level of accountability do you have for kids? He said, we're holding them accountable for those learning targets. That's the problem. You got to think big ideas, not small ideas. Because if the kids knew that, they were getting the commas in the right spot and they weren't writing well. Need to rethink assuming all standards are equal, what learning is truly important for all students, and support and intervention strategies. Prioritize collaboration over pace. Okay? One of the big things on proficiency is let's see how fast kids can go, and they go on their own go on their own pace. Okay? The 3 most important learning aids in the classroom are teachers, fellow students, and teaching materials. If we put kids on their own pace, and so by day 3 of all of you here, you're all in a different spot, I end up either doing online stuff or worksheets. You're all working in isolation from each other. Why would we prioritize student pace over everything else when it removes the teacher, when it removes students, and it only keeps the teaching materials there? It doesn't make any sense to me to do that. Think about pace in terms of units of learning, not about what can I rush to the next thing. Okay? There's a whole other piece on this about the level of learning that happens and all that. We need to rethink isolated online learning. I know online learning is a big thing that a lot of people are going to. I believe technology is important. I believe we should give a laptop to every kid. Okay? At the same time, so much online learning is simply electronic worksheets. Okay? That doesn't do anybody any good. If it's isolated online learning, I don't buy it. How to create inclusive instructional strategies so that all kids can learn, and building student agency over compliance. I want kids to own their learning, not be compliant. So let me finally end on this piece here. And I said in the beginning, we think about design principles. There's a good news and a bad news on this. Okay? The bad news is, I'm actually arguing there's some foundational beliefs that we should change. That's a big thing. Okay? The good news is a lot of the instructional strategies we use right now are going to be every bit as good in a new system. And so the gear up strategy is probably easier than to run around and try to change all these instructional strategies. I think we're trying to change instructional strategies and build on a poor foundation as opposed to saying, let's change the foundation. Let's rethink how we're actually moving all this work forward. So the key piece here is what needs to stop, what needs to improve, what remains the same. And to be honest, people talk about proficiency and they say we're going to have all these different things, all this different stuff's going to happen for kids. I think a lot of it's going to stay the same for a while, and that's okay. You're going to have the prom, you're still going to have the football team, you're still going to have dances, all those things are going to be there. But we can fundamentally change what kids learn and how they learn it if we change the foundation and the design principles we have. Thank you so much.